And it's recording now, so let's start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last meetup of 2020. So we made it. It's been like a whole year locked in front of our computers, but we managed to do like pretty much one meetup on almost every session.
Woohoo!
Exactly. So most of you already know, but it's like just for the people that is getting the recording later on. So who are ACSUG, right? So the Auckland Connected Systems User Groups. So we are over 500 members now on Meetup, and we've been talking about Azure integration and lately about cloud-related technologies since we started. Do you remember when, Craig? 2015, I think.
That's about right, actually.
Yeah. So it's been a while, 5+ years. And we are the organizers of the Global Integration Bootcamp here in New Zealand. And our leadership team is, apart from me, Craig Hayden, that took the reins on Thiago Almeida left to Redmond. Colin G. Graff, that is not here today. Mike Howell, that is not been quite active lately because being too busy. And Alessandro Moura from ASB and Will also from ASB that joined us last year and this year respectively. So if you wanted to help out, right, you can always volunteer for a talk. We can suggest some topics. Like one of the main problems for us sometimes is find out what should we be talking next and trying to find new people to talk, because I'm pretty sure that you don't want to hear me, Alessandro, Craig, and Will talking all the time, right? And if you think that you wanted to help but you don't want to present or suggest something, always happy with some help with the organization, from managing Meetup to anything or helping do the event. Okay. We have a Twitter account where we put most of the information about the upcoming messages or meetings, so you can go there. And because we now are recording those sessions, we also have a YouTube channel. So if you didn't subscribe to that yet, you can go to bit.ly/ACSUG-channel, and that's going to take you to our YouTube channel until we have about 100 subscribers and manage to get our own URL. So what we have on today's show? The main thing, we have two sessions today. One of the sessions is going to be me talking about static IP for Azure functions. It's something that has been cooking for some time, and I find out that it's a quite useful tool, especially for us on the integration realm, to deal with legacy integrations and some of the requirements that you had before. So the presenter of that is going to be yours truly, right, Wagner Silveira, and I'm the Digital Integration Practice Lead at Tita and Azure MVP. The next session, so we're going to have like two small sessions. I'm going to be presenting for about 30 minutes and then Alessandro for another 30 minutes. And Alessandro is going to be talking about developing web APIs in C#. It's something that he's been doing a lot on ASB according to him, where he's the digital chapter lead on the digital team. We always try to close that introduction with some legends, right? But I think it was just fitting to say that the main legend for us right now is, yes, we made it. We had a semi-regular year of sessions. I think is probably between April and now, we have one almost every month, either between us or doing cross sessions with our siblings of Auckland Azure user group, and the Azure lunchtime, and the NotSure.net user group. So it was really quite busy year for us, which is good. But on the other hand, most of those sessions has actually been remote, like the one that you're doing today. And today is the first session that we're actually doing on Teams instead of using Teams live events. I would really like your feedback on that to see if we should be using that format going forward, or if you prefer the previous format. But the last session in person was, I think, the Global Integration Bootcamp back in April. So it's been a while. We're planning to come back to some of those sections next year, doing a hybrid. The hybrid events probably is going to be like the Windows Live events, because then it's easier to manage. But if we needed to do some remote events, we try to make the remote events using just Teams so we can have a little bit more interaction. Okay. So on that note, I'm just going to stop this slideshow and go to the next one.
Just before we move on there, Wagner, I think
Yep.
you've been quite modest, man, because that award actually goes out to you. I don't think the number of sessions we've had this year would have been possible without you driving that through, man. So yeah, just thank you very much for that. Been
Thanks,
really
man. But takes a village.
Yeah, you've been the chief of the village for a while.
That's okay. Thank you for that. So let's start the first one. So we're going to be talking today is Azure Functions static IP address using NAT gateways. You can see that I did that like really quickly this morning with my awesome spell of using. No, didn't notice?
I had a giggle.
Cool.
Uskeding.
Yeah. So the agenda for that is, let's talk quickly about what is NAT gateways. Let's see what are scenarios that can be useful for us as integration people, right? How can I use that? How can I configure some of the components and spoiler alert, mainly functions to leverage that? Show some demos, and then find out where we can learn more. So what are those NAT gateways? The NAT gateways is basically a way to simplify outbound-only connectivity. Instead of you having to find a route through firewalls or something else, you can simply say that a specific subnet on a virtual network that is attached to that NAT gateway is always going to outbound route outbound traffic to public internet through a specific public IP. You don't need to have a load balancer implemented. We don't need to get IP directly associated to a resource like a VM. And most of the times, the usage of that would be one or more VMs on a subnet. When they needed to go out, it would go out through this NAT gateway and get in the public IP. It's like like when you're doing NAT on your internal router. So everything goes through that, and then you can actually have traffic back and forth on that public IP. Right? So what scenarios we can see that is quite useful for that? Who here had the case where you needed to connect to a FTP server on a bank, and the first thing that the bank asks is like, what is your static IP address? Probably most of us, right? Or do you need to connect to something on-prem, and they don't want to install anything, but they have like an F5 firewall, and they say, just give me an IP address and what ports you wanted to get, and I'll allow you to come in. That's all nice and dandy when you're connecting VMs into those services. But what happens when you're doing that with the tools that you have today that is serverless tools, like logic apps or functions or even web APIs, right? You sometimes can get away to say, okay, I have an Azure function or I have a logic app, and I needed to go and talk to this HTTP endpoint that is exposed and needs a static IP, I'm going to put a hammer in the middle. I'm going to put API management. And there is some cost associated to that, but it's something that is doable, right? But when you're doing that, it's still restricting to HTTP protocol. API management, for example, doesn't support stream. HTTP API management doesn't support all the protocols like FTP, maybe SQL, and things like that, right? So those are the scenarios where the ability to have a public IP address that can be exposed and is not something that is tightly bound to HTTP protocol like API management would be useful. But that would only be useful if we could also use that against one of our serverless technologies. And so far, we're talking about a virtual network, right? So how can we leverage this without a VM? We can leverage that thanks to VNet integration on the app services, right? So we're talking about app services with the VNet integration, or since Azure Functions actually run under app services, Azure Functions in some tiers, and more interesting yet, Azure Logic Apps preview, because now it actually uses the same engine as Azure Functions for some of the components. In order to have that, you needed to configure VNet integration, and you're going to see how we do that soon. But before that, you need a VNet deployed, a NET gateway deployed, a public IP address of a certain tier deployed, and the subnets associated to that VNet all configured, right? After that, you can attach app service plan or an Azure function with some of the app service tiers. Like for function, you're talking about premium consumption. If you have premium consumption, you have VNet integration. Because of that, it is going to work. Or you can be using Azure function with a dedicated plan, right? An app service dedicated plan. Or you can be using web apps for a web app on one of the dedicated plans. Then what you needed to do is configure the VNet integration to use the VNet and subnet that are connected to that NET gateway. So you're going to see that in a minute. But there is also one last trick. By default, when you have VNet integration in place, what happens is all the traffic that is supposed to be private goes through the VNet. All the traffic that is supposed to be public goes directly through the outbound load balancers that you have with the app service itself, right? If you wanted to route all the traffic that is inside app service, like a function or a web app, into the virtual network, we needed to do a little trick inside the configuration using that specific app setting. Webset VNet route all needs to be set to 1, to true. And that is the place where that didn't work before. NET gateway is in place for almost a year, I think, or a little bit more than that, because I remember trying that last year. But what happened is, up to last year, the load balancers that app services in general were using was a type of load balancer that was not supported by NET gateway. One of the works that had been done through the app service team throughout this year was actually to say some of those plans now have the latest version of this load balancer, the standard instead of the basic load balancer. And because of that, all of a sudden, that website VNAT route all managed to actually go out or go into the subnet and then get out through the NAT gateway. So that's why you're saying, well, that was there for a while. Why was we only talking about that now? Because until now, it was not working due to some restrictions on the how the app services were set up. But enough of me talking. I think I already talked for about 10 minutes or so, and I'm pretty sure that what you actually want to see is the portal. So let's see if I can bring that up. And sorry, you're going to see just my profile because I needed to look at here. And what I need to do is come into the portal. What I have here in the portal is I created a resource group and I created a whole lot of different samples for us to take a quick look. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is take a look at that function net vnet. So on that vnet, we have 4 subnets, and one of those subnets are configured to use a NAT gateway, right? And if you look at the NAT gateway, is extremely simple as well. If I try to find the NAT gateway here, that's the one. What you do here, you configure an outbound IP address, and that IP address is an IP address that you created. The only thing is that IP address needs to be a standard IP address, right? So when you getting public IP address, Azure, they have some tiers like. I go to public IP address and I try to create a new one. I want an static one, and I have the basic and standard skill, right? So in order for you to use that with the NAT gateway, we needed to get a standard IP address. And since we are here, if you adding a new NAT gateway, the only thing that is asking is the name. So what is the resource group? A resource group. This is sample gateway. Doesn't have availability zone here. Then when it gets the outbound IP, you create a new public IP with the name, right? And so let's try to create a new one. Sample IP of standard static. And then it asks, what is the virtual networks that you have available? And what is the subnet that you're going to connect that to? Then after that, you go in and create. Is that what you needed to do? It doesn't understand almost anything about the network, managed to get that working. So in theory, it's easy. So once you get all of that created, you created your VNet with your subnets defined, you create your IP address, and you create your NAT gateway, and connect the gateway to the subnet, then that's where you go to the functions. In this case, the function, but it could be the function or the app service or even the logic apps preview and do something about it, right? So in this case, let's get this function net and look what that one is doing. That function net is using this the ESP, that is the EP1, which is the consumption premium. Okay, so in theory that one should be able to do, because then you're going to find here that networking is enabled. And if I look at the configuration of networking, I see that I'm connected to that function at VNet, and it's connected to that particular subnet, function consumption premium. If I look at that function consumption premium subnet, that subnet is connected to the net gateway. So what is going to happen if I try to use that? Let's find out. So to show how that works, I have a very complex function here. That basically invokes that URI and returns the response. If I try that here, it returns my home IP address. And just to prove, there you go, right? I don't think Google Google never lies, right? So in this case, if I run that, what should be the value that I receive back, since we have all of that connected? It should be the IP address of of that public IP that we associated to that gateway, right? And I didn't even saw the value that was there. First, let's run this. Fingers crossed that it's still working. And I receive a 20, 53, 104, 241. So now that I know this number, let's go back to my public IP address. And what is the IP address here? There we go, 20, 53, 104, 241. Okay, so what that means that the function actually went through the VNet, then went out through the net gateway and connected to that IP address using this, which is all good. Just to prove that that's not that is actually what's happening, if I come to networking and disconnect from the VNet integration, then if I run that again, takes a while because it's doing the disconnection and resetting some stuff. What is my IP? Golden test. Test and run. I'm receiving that 20, 53, 67, 168. If you look at that number here, chances are that we're going to find that number under what is properties. Under one of those outbound IP addresses, right? So just to prove, I'm going to copy that list to our trusty notepad. Now going to copy that list just in case there as well. So let's run that one last time. And see if that's the case. So there we go. The number that we talk is 20, 53, 67, 168. Funnily enough, exactly that first one here. Okay, so that shows that when we have the VNet integration, now we're going out through the net gateway. When that is disconnected, it's going through the outbound. A couple of other examples where you can use that. If I come here and find my Logic App Net Research preview, in here I have two workflows. Right? I have a net routing calls stateful. And again, just to double check, if I look at the networking here and look at the configuration, I have that same configuration, right? Going to the same function net, or it's same function subnet that we saw before. And if I get that workflow, what is that one doing? Come on, internet. There you go. When an HTTP call is received, we're just calling what is my IP and sending back the response. That's the only thing we're doing, right? So if I get that, and I use my good old Postman to show that, because I can remember if I enable GET or not. There we go. So fingers crossed, when I call that, it come back with the IP address of the thing. But you're probably saying, come on, Wagner, HTTP, really? So we talk so much about function and the FTP. So here is another example where that can be useful. I created a function, right? And just to show you the actual code for that. Bear with me for a minute. There we go. And don't judge me. That was done yesterday really quickly, right? But basically that one is using WinSCP to connect to an FTP server and bring back a list of the items on that remote folder. Okay, to prove that that can work, first what you need to do is get the, actually show to you that right now we are not connecting to the network, right? So there is no configuration. That means that if I run this, I actually not going to be receiving anything. I'm going to receive a timeout because I cannot connect to the FTP server. So it's going to take a while. And eventually we're going to receive a timeout. Come on, timeout already. There we go. Look at that, it was almost magic. So what we're going to do with that is we're going to configure, right? So we're going to be adding a VNet. And the virtual network that we're talking about is the function net. The external VNet, I'll just show you really soon, is the external VNet is the one where I have the FTP server. And the subnet that I'm going to be using is that function dedicated. And you're going to see that that function dedicated, it's also connected to the NAT gateway. Okay. So now it should take a little bit of a time to that to reset everything. See, there is thinking. Because it's what happens on this case is that it's trying to connect to the storage account also through VNet, but now that is connected, and the demo gods are with me. When I run that, I should receive back a list of FTP components. There you go, right? So basically, it's just a Linux FTP server, and here is the list of all the items that was there. We can always prove this by going to the actual FTP server and see what we have there. Alessandro, Craig, how are we going with time?
You have spoken for about, what's it, 30 minutes now, mate?
Okay, so I think you guys trust me to show that is that is actually coming from the FTP server, and we see that we didn't have connectivity before, right? So that shows that you actually have a lot more potential than just HTTP. And what we can do now, just to finish, is go back to here and saying that to learn more, I have a list of entries here. I actually wrote a blog post about that a couple of weeks ago. And most of the things that I show you here is explained there in kind of more of step by step if you want to. But if you wanted to know more about ACSUG and what changed on the NAT gateway that is actually now supporting the ACSUG, how you see, there is a blog post from the ACSUG team, and also a couple of links from from Microsoft Docs about NAT gateway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that list and put into the chat window, and you can use that. Okay, so with that, that's me for today. If you guys want, we can have a couple of minutes for questions. Otherwise, we can push into the Alessandro can start.
Question I had, Wagner. The IPs and the assignment of the VNets and the likes, is there anything that needs to be done in the ARM templates when doing releases to make sure that they happen in the correct order?
You mean the IP, the outbound IPs from the app service that we showed before?
Yeah, so is there anything we have to do before we can do a release, right? So is there any, do we have to go and provision the public IP address before we can do VNets in the CI/CD for functions?
Yeah, so the thing is, you're going to need that VNet in place with the net gateway, and the prerequisite. So the prerequisite for the net gateway is an IP address, right? So you needed to deploy a VNet, with the configuration that you need to, and a net gateway with the static IP address. So once you configure that, then when you get in the function and deploy, you can also configure the VNet integration. That you can do by ARM, or you can do on the portal after that.
Nice. And then also,
right, so,
oh, sorry, mate.
Yeah, so the VNet integration part, you can I think you can also do by using ARM, but you needed the prerequisites to be in place. So your pipeline needed to be, if not exist, deployed VNet, net gateway, IP addresses with its own dependencies, then deploy function, and as part of the function deployment, configure the VNet integration.
Perfect.
Make sense?
Yeah. And then also this does work for scale out, right? When functions scale out, they still come through the same net. So
yeah, that's the thing, because because when you're scaling out, you have like that website the VNet route all pointing, meaning that you're always going through the VNet out. Then all the outbound calls for your function goes out through that VNet.
That's perfect, man.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Any other question, guys?
Just the question of when's Alessandro going to speak, I guess.
Yeah, so Alessandro, all yours.
Thank you, Wagner. Just one comment on those network controls we have in place right now for app serves. So that becomes really important for, I guess, large organizations like the one that I work for today. So I work for ASB. So without those network controls, it becomes really hard for us to use the public cloud service, because, you know, we need to have a great amount of security, both inbound and outbound communication. So when those network controls that are being put in place by the app service team, the Azure functions, logic apps, all those guys. So all this work that has been done is enabling like those large organizations to start using those public service that by now is going to become like kind of a private cloud. So that enables us to use those services, which is quite cool.
Yeah, and on that talk, we're only talking about Net Gateway, but together with Net Gateway, you have service endpoints, we have private links, and now we're able to actually kind of close off, even though your resources still publish on Azure, it's not necessarily on Azure. You have the controls on inbound, right? That you can put in front of a Net Gateway or an app gateway and say, nothing that I don't scan comes to this thing. When you're going out, you can go out to the public through that Net Gateway, so you can have this, but you also have service endpoints and you have private links to say, when on-premise talking to this, talk through this private IP address, so you don't have to expose IP. And when you coming through this IP address as well. So there is a whole lot of stuff that you can do to really secure those resources.
Yep.
And specifically for us, as people that is working more on the integration, that thing about having logic apps on the function runtime is going to enable a whole lot of those other things for us as well, right? So all of a sudden you'll be able to deal or to have a solution for the same kind of problems that you have that you're doing for functions before. And I know for a fact that they're going to be doing another update on the public preview between today and tomorrow, because they schedule between today and Thursday, because they schedule a new live event next Friday, right? Showing what is the updates that they did on the logic new runtime.
Mhm.
So keep an eye on that. It's probably a topic for early next year.
Awesome.
Cool. So I'll close my camera now, and it's all yours, man.
Let me share the right stuff. So hopefully you guys can see my screen now. Okay, so I've been willing to talk about.
Sorry, Alessandro. Just one quick thing. I think you're showing the presenter view. There we go.
So I've been willing to talk about the ASB way of doing integration for quite some time, because I guess I think all of us can blame COVID for stuff. So because of COVID, that didn't happen so far. So I'm glad that I'm able to talk about this right now. This is, I guess, my first attempt or my first draft on this talk. Hopefully, I can improve that in the next months, probably next year. But I think I'm covering, like, with the information that I put together. I think I'm covering pretty much what happens at ASB right now. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Alessandro. I work for ASB since last year. I am from Brazil. If you didn't notice by my perfect English, so I'm from Brazil. And this is my Twitter handle as well as my blog, where I used to post stuff from time to time. Okay. What I want to talk is how we do integration at ASB, to talk about a little bit of the whole roadmap of stuff we are planning, that we did or that we are planning to do, right? So ASB being a bank, as you can guess, is a very complex environment. So we have all sorts of applications running there, and the integration side also have the same kind of stuff, right? So we have many components from many technologies. So this diagram you guys can see right now on the screen shows a little bit of what we used to have up to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 5 years ago. So that was a little bit of what we used to have. So we used to have Complus components. We have lots and lots of components built with WCF. We have Bestalk. We have other integration components that enable this type of communication with API gateways. So this one, I think it's layer 7, and many front end or many applications, third-party applications, or our own internet banking communicating with those components. All of them, normally they are going to reach what we call a system of records. So it's where the data is actually going to be stored. So that's a very complex environment. So depending the type of data you want to extract or you want to manipulate, you need to consume one of those components, which make the development very challenging. Because I think since the beginning, ASB took the decision to build themselves all the integration components. So we have teams inside the bank that does this type of I would say platform development. So we are able to do all the monitoring of our requests coming through. We are able to do our security mechanisms on top of those requests that are coming through. Lots of governance configuration, but because we, one of the first frameworks that was developed was on top of Complex Core. A few years later, we moved to WCF, and that became quite complex to manage in terms of first the landscape, all the components we have at ASB, as well as with the newest technologies. So right now, for example, if we try to make a front-end application, we need to work with the latest type of back-end communication, which is going to be probably APIs with REST and JSON, right? And if we are dealing with complex core, if we are dealing with the WCF, we have challenges. Sometimes it's not going to be possible to have REST being published by complex core. Sometimes it's going to be hard to be done and very cumbersome configuration with WCF. So this type of environment we used to have was not, we can say at that time, for 4 or 5 years ago, was not future fit. That's why we came, well, the bank, I was not at the bank at the time, so that's why at the time, the architects and all the integration architects in the bank decided to move to, I guess, a better way of doing things. And that came with APIs. And by APIs, I mean just, standard REST APIs using JSON as a communication way to exchange information between the front-end ASB applications with the system of records. To allow and to enable that to happen, the platform guys, they built a lot of tooling to enable us to develop this on the, I guess, the easiest way possible. But again, we are going to develop the APIs to consume those services and apply those things whenever needed. The discovery, the logging, the throttling of the platform, identity security. So this is all built in-house. So it's a very, I can say from the things I've seen out there, it's a very comprehensive platform. It pretty much takes care of everything to us. So just show a little bit of the past with this scenario using WCF complex core to the future with APIs, and just to mention that this is considering a kind of a microservices type of architecture. So each API, they are going to be concerned with only one thing. So very high reusable components we have throughout the bank. As you can guess, because the environment is very complex, we were not able to move everything from the past to the future. So some of these components you're going to see that they are just wrappers. They are going to be in place until we are able to move the remaining pieces written in old technologies. So, but these API wrappers are going to enable us to work with the future front-end type of way of development, but it's still having our legacy code working on the back-end side. Okay. So as I mentioned, this movement to work with APIs is very focused on the REST type of development. So we apply the level 3, basically. Yeah, I think we are on the level 3 RESTful service. I don't think we have the hypermedia in place, but our communications goes everything through HTTP. We have taxonomy, resource namings, versioning, policies, security, caching. So everything in this is applied to those APIs. We have a very comprehensive documentation on how to do the development for the things we want to deliver. So I guess like if your company is willing to do this kind of development in-house from everything using C# code, you need to consider all these things that if you're using like tools like I don't know, Logic Apps or Beanstalk or even some other technologies, you can get some of this to you. But anyway, this is if you're getting like out of the box or if you are building house, those are things you need to consider. And as I mentioned, all of these platform, all of these frameworks, they are enabling us to work as in a microservices type of architectures, which right now we have everything running in virtual machines. So we have like servers that host all those APIs, but because we are building in such a way that we can just contain those APIs in a single, I guess, host system, we are pretty much able to move those APIs to working inside of containers. Okay, and that's going to be the next, I get the next phases. We are in place right now to implement .NET Core as our main development framework. So using .NET Core, we should be able to host those APIs inside Linux VMs, or inside Linux containers, or inside maybe Windows containers, I don't know. But we should be able to port those things as a Docker images and host that in Kubernetes or some other orchestrators like Docker Swarm as well. Okay, so I just try to put like the scenario for where we have a kind of roadmap from where we were, where we are right now. I want to show you also how things are done from the development until the deployment. So that's where I guess I can say we have a very mature environment to enable us to be very agile in development of our backend services. So we follow the very, I guess, the best practice in terms of code development. As you can see here, we use Web API. So Web API is our main framework for development of our APIs. We are using the latest is going to be .NET Core 3.1. When developing the APIs, as you can see here, we use inversion of control and dependency injection to make sure that all those components, they are, I guess I can say loosely coupled, as well as testable as much as possible. So this is the controller class. In the controller class, we are going to use other services that are going to be injected whenever the controller gets called. So this is injected by unit on the .NET framework and using the .NET Core model when using .NET Core. So we don't have, if you look like at the code here, I hope you guys can see my mouse. We don't have any kind of business logic on the controller. So the controller is basically the entry point for this. And we need like any kind of business logic, we have this service class that is defined here. That is going to be actually doing communication. Was not able to get like the whole code here, but this is calling a repository class to actually make the communication with the backend. So as you can see, very heavily developed on top of interface to make our code easily workable with IOC and dependency injection as well. Lots of coding to the interface instead of coding to a concrete class, which makes our life a lot easier. And this is where we work with injecting the actual classes we want whenever we need them in our code. And this is a little bit of our structure. You can see we have a controller, we have the service class that contains the business logic, we have the repository class that does the communication with the backend or the data store whenever needed. All kinds of definitions for our models whenever we have to receive an entity to create a structure in the database, another entity to update a structure in the database, and this is when we need to just read data in our database. This thing you can see, it's all working together with our framework. So all the main components were developed by our platform team. So this type of code, it's very easy for the developer to work and make sure we are following the best practice in our developments. With the way we did the development of those controllers, services, repositories, it makes, I guess, easier to do unit tests. So when we are talking about unit tests, we are talking about testing that particular method without having to deal with the dependencies, right? So let's say I want to call the service class and make sure that if I pass a set of parameters, I'm going to receive a certain response, but I don't want to call the backend. I don't want to call the actual database. So what we can do in that sense, it's to work with mocks. And for that, we use a framework called mock, where we can provide, okay, I have this data that I expect to receive from the repository class. So I provide all the data here to say, okay, I expect to receive that response when I pass any integer. So it becomes very easy for us to test just the service without being concerned with the actual call to the database. And the way we did the developments following the best practice allow us to do exactly that. So this is for the unit tests. For the integration test, we use SpecFlow. So in that sense, SpecFlow with the integration tests is going to actually make the call end-to-end. So we are going to make a call on the API, and then we are going to reach all the way down to the data source, whatever that might be. For that, we need to provide the input data, as well as we need to have some kind of setup on the environment to make sure the data we need is on the system. So integration unit test, we are testing just that particular method. Integration test, we are testing the whole integration all the way to the data source. So SpecFlow is going to make this, I guess, easier for us to do this in our tests. So I'm going to stop now. I still have a few slides to go. I just want to give you guys a chance to make questions if you have any. I'm not following the chat, so I don't know.
Hi, Arvind here. I got a question.
Yep.
So what sort of mechanism you follow for the request validation?
What? Say it again, sorry.
What sort of mechanism you have do for the request validation, like the model, right? The request validation in the business layer or in the controller level? I believe it should be in the business level. Business logic.
This is going to be in the business layer, so it's going to be in that service class that I was showing up.
I mean, like, do you use any framework or just a normal validation within the business layer?
So if it's just data validation, we are probably going to apply action filters. So that's normally how we do. So for the web API, we have the action filters that can, before we actually do any kind of execution on the API code, we kind of let that to the web API framework to handle that for us. Yeah, so that's normally for the data kind of validation we do in that sense. If we need to actually make a call on the, so some kind of a data call to actually make a validation, so that's not going to work. So it's going to require some kind of business logic. Then we just apply some validation on the code itself, but we don't necessarily follow like any framework. It depends like on the developer to decide what they want to do or how they want to do as well.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah. I have a question from Will about we have a plan to get off Complus. Yes, we have. But as you know, since you work in a bank, it takes a little bit of time to move from the legacy. But more and more we are seeing APIs showing up, and those APIs they are meant to be replacing legacy components. It can be Complus Core, it can be middleware. Of course, we are dependent on budget. We are dependent on have the money available to do the work and prioritize as well. But yes, the idea is to move like all these legs we have still more and more we are going to get rid of those. Any other question, guys, before I proceed? Okay.
And feel free to unmute yourself and ask if you want to.
Okay, so if you have questions, just let me know. So going back here. So I show a little bit like how the code works and also like how the development of the unit test, integration test. By the way, just going back to the unit test, we don't take the tests lightly at the bank. So for any kind of component to pass to production, they need to have at least 80% code coverage. Otherwise, we don't. So based on our policy, it cannot go live, right? So we have lots and lots of controls to make sure the code we deliver is the best quality possible. So, and unit tests, integration tests, they are going to allow that to happen. Okay.
Right.
What is that?
You have to say that, don't you?
Yeah. And I think like it's important to mention because whenever we make a development, we are talking about whenever we make a deployment to production, we are impacting millions of customers. Of course, we want to make sure because of the brand of the bank, the brand of ASB, we need to make sure that we don't publish something that was not tested properly. So to control that, we need to have some of these validations in place to make sure the best possible quality it's in place. I don't know if you guys are ASB clients, but we don't have many issues in production. At least I haven't seen them. So it means we are doing like a good work in terms of making sure the code that is in production is with very good quality.
Is that actually, just speaking to the testing, is that actually a full end-to-end integration test? Or do you only test the isolated microservice or component that's being released and its dependencies?
So it depends the type of component we are building. So if I'm building just what we call a core component, so that component just talk with systems of record, so it's going to be just that small piece. But if I'm developing an API that we call Experience API, so it's API that is tied with the front end, so that's going to require a lot more components. So we need to test all the way down to the system of record.
Right. Because I imagine in a microservice environment, it can get quite messy as to who's calling you at what points.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. So if I'm testing like that component that just talk with that one database, it's going to be a very, I guess, isolated type of integration test. But it's still we are going to test all the way down to the data store. But if I'm testing the front end, it's pretty much everything. We need to make sure, and we need to have like all the scenarios written down to say, okay, on the front end, I need to have the test that covers all these possible situations. Maybe I'm building something for QB Saver, right? So I need to test QE Saver with lots of scenarios for success and failure as well. So that needs to cover all the way down to the data store.
Perfect. Thanks, man.
Okay. Another thing we have in place, it's we can call the governance of those APIs. So I need to know what I have available whenever I start developing anything, right? So let's say I want to build a new credit card experience. And for that, I need to consume the credit card services or data that is available. I need to consume the bank accounts that maybe can make a transfer. I need to consume, I don't know, maybe images that are associated with that credit card and anything that is related to that experience. And I need to find that out in my domain, which is digital, or other domains, in this case, credit cards, bank accounts, and so on and so forth. I need to find out what APIs are available, what they do, if they are going to help me to do my system or not. So for that, we have our management portal. Basically, we can find everything that is related to those APIs. APIs, it's the main level. Inside APIs, we have the services. So I'm just showing up the demo APIs because I don't want to show exactly the name of our APIs for, I don't know if I'm gonna get in trouble, so I'm trying to avoid that. So I'm just showing like stuff that is not production stuff.
Better be safe than sorry.
What is that?
Better be safe than sorry.
Exactly. I didn't ask the permission to anyone, so I'm, being safe here for my side, of course.
Well done.
So yeah, so basically we have APIs. So let's say I have a bank accounts APIs, and then I have a service to show the balances. I have another service to show the number of accounts and so on and so forth, right? So that's how we are going to split those things in there. Once I know what API I want to call, I can look like what is the model that I'm receiving, as well as I'm exposing back. I can try it out if I have the proper permission to do so. So probably our developers for digital domain. So if you are a developer for the digital domain, you should have access to make calls on the development environment. If you go to other environments like QA in production, of course, you're not going to have this permission. You can analyze the model, but you should be able to make a call, okay? But this is using basically like the Swagger that I'm exposing from those APIs. So I know exactly what those APIs are, expecting in terms of data to get into the system, as well the data that is going to come back. And we have many other services like looking at the logging of the calls. So I think this is just one quick view for stuff that is actually in production. So don't tell anyone. But we have like one API that is called personalization. This API basically returns data specific to our customers to say, oh, you have this particular image tied to an account, you have this particular name that is chosen to represent your account, and so on and so forth. We are able at any time to go and see what's going on in our system for any of the environments that we maintain. We have a map that shows exactly what is the connection between. No, we have a mapping that shows exactly what is the communication between the APIs. So if I want to use, let's go back to the credit card experience API, and I want to know exactly what that thing is calling in my system, I can make like I can see a map of that through this management portal that we have for our APIs, okay? And last but not least, and I think that's one of the things that I thought when I joined ASB that is the most cool stuff in place, is we have the DevOps experience that handles all the way from the setup as well as to the deployment into our production systems. So if you are about to develop an API, you go to this portal, you say, I want to develop an API, the name of the API is so-and-so, it's going to have this service, it's going to have these endpoints in this environment. So you specify a few things, you click a button, and the API is created for you with the repository set in TFS, with the deployments, with the build set as well on TFS, and the deployment configured to run in Octopus. So that's what we are using right now. We are probably, yeah, let's leave at that. So that's how we have the configuration. Sorry, I'm just thinking stuff that I can't say, stuff I cannot say. In terms of the build pipelines, I guess if you guys seen that before, it's pretty much standard. So we are going to get the source code, we are going to build the solution, we are going to test the solution. So all those tests that I did, the unit tests, the integration tests, this one is looking just, I think, for the unit test right now. So the build phase, we are going to look for the unit test. The deployment phase, we are going to look to the integration tests as well. So I'm looking right now to say, okay, I'm gonna take your unit test, I'm gonna execute that first. Of course, none of the tests can fail, because if it fails, I'm gonna stop the process right here. And you need to have a certain coverage, otherwise this is not gonna proceed as well. At the end of the process, I'm gonna publish this to Nugget, and then I'm gonna create the Octopus release to do the actual deployments into the environment. And this happens basically whenever you check the code in the branch that you're working. So probably you're going to be working on the developer branch. As soon as you do the checking of the code here, through doing that directly or using a feature branch to do that and do a pull request here, this thing is going to be started and start the deployment for you. Once the build is finished, you are going to automatically do the deployments on CI. As a developer, you are able to move to dev, you are able to move to QA. For production, it's not going to be you, because you we need to have like what we call separation of duties. So a developer shouldn't be touching production. A developer is not going to deployed, even though the developer have the access to do so, a developer cannot deploy to QA before passing all the controls we have in place. But still, if he really wants to, he can. It's not going to be good for him, but he can. In production, he doesn't have the access to do so. So, but this is all controlled through this Octopus dashboard that is going to tell us, okay, this version of the API is going to be deployed at this moment in this particular environment. The important thing to know is like this is all made available to you. So it's very easy to move one piece of code from development to production, as long as you have all the controls in place, of course. Okay, I just want to show a little bit of the code, maybe other than in these slides. I hope that code runs. Before that, anyone have any other question?
There's nothing on the chat. Does anyone want to ask a question? As you said before, just unmute yourself and go for it.
Okay, let me log to my. Can you guys see my screen? Do I need to zoom in, or is that okay?
We can, but it's really small, mate. Yeah, if you can zoom in, it would be better.
Better?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm just gonna show a little bit of the configuration we do. So all of this, some of this is like the Web API standard. And I think if I go up on the controller, this is, I think this is on a ASB1, if I'm not mistaken. So I have here basically my controller class. I'm injecting the service class or interface to allow a concrete class to be injected here. And once I have an actual call to do a get following the REST standards, I'm gonna call my service class. Again, all the final, interfaces. And this is the actual code where I'm gonna do some validations. Okay, I have the right thing in place. So I have some validation in terms of who is the client that is calling, if this client have the proper permission to do so. If the client have the permission to do so, then I'm gonna go to the, yeah, I think this is a little bit more complex because I use some design pattern to allow us to be more, I guess, flexible in terms of implementing new personalization types. I'm not gonna go into this complexity right now. I'm just gonna show that I have at some point the call is gonna come here to my repository class. That is gonna make the actual call to the database. Okay. Let me go back here. Another thing that I want to show, so we have here, and you can see this guy here. So one thing that happens between the type of data that I'm receiving from the controller and the type of data that I want to pass to my repository class, they are not the same. Normally, I have a DTO, a data transfer object from the controller, and I have my internal DTO to actually communicate with the repository. So that's why I need to do a translation between what I received to what I have inside my component. So these are, we can say these allow a type of canonical model. If you are a stock developer, maybe you know what I say, or what I'm saying right now. But I need to translate from what I'm receiving to what I have internally. And for that, we can use a framework called AutoMapper. We use that a lot during our development of APIs with .NET Framework. That's not happening that much anymore because I think the developers are not liking that much. So even though we have this in place, it's not mandatory to use. So you can follow other patterns. Maybe I can show something that I did. I was one of the, I guess, developers that don't like to use AutoMapper. It's here. So I don't like to use AutoMapper. So AutoMapper, there's some learning that we need to do, and sometimes it doesn't work exactly the way we expect, and it takes like a long time to sort some issues. Even though I think we should be able to figure out like everything, but sometimes it takes too long. So normally I work with extension methods. I like this one better than using watermark, but it's up to developer to define what they want to do. And just to show another thing, so I mentioned the way we did the development for APIs, but that's pretty much the way we do the development for anything, right? So if I'm going to develop for APIs with WebAPI.NET Framework, we are going to follow the same kind of design patterns for development for .NET Framework APIs, .NET Core APIs, or in this case, I'm doing a Kafka producer actually. So as you can see, I have my producer that is going to generate message to my application. I have the actual producer service that's gonna, control, that's gonna be installed on my Windows, Linux machine. And I have the business logic here that is gonna handle that. Whatever I need to be from where I need to get the data, how kind of validations, conditions I need to do, stuff like that. And I have my repository class to handle the communication with the data source. Okay, so the way the structure of the development that I showed to you guys for APIs, it pretty much works for anything. And if I go here, this is an actual Azure function. So it doesn't matter if I did APIs with web APIs in .NET Framework or .NET Core. It doesn't matter if I did Kafka. It doesn't matter if I did like Azure Functions. I'm following the same type of design patterns for development. I guess would make the life of our developers very, I guess, much easier. Let me try, just not be on the talk. Let me try to execute this.
If it's reversing charges, mate, feel free to use my account number.
Sorry?
If your demo reverses charges, feel free to use my bank account number.
Oh, okay. No, that's okay. I'm running side on-prem, so I'm not paying anything here. Probably ACB is paying, but I'm not.
So what he's saying is you can give him his account number, but he's not going to do anything with that. Maybe.
It is taking some time. These components are the way we do the development at ASB is on I guess remote desktops. So I'm not exactly running on my machine. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it works less well. So, but anyway, so this is basically me starting the Windows service in that sense, my producer. So that one is gonna call the service class. So let's put a break. Oh, I can just do a step into, go to process data. Then I'm gonna call my repository class. And again, if you can see, let me go back a little bit. If you can see the definition of the service class, it's interface, right? So whenever I'm coding, I'm always coding to the interface. To the abstraction. I'm never coding to the concrete. That's where allows me. Let me just go back here a little bit. So I could just follow here, but like it's just publishing a message in Kafka, so you're not going to be able to see anything. But let's just switch to the tests. Guess I have something here. So if I go to my test explorer, this one. So I just want to, I don't care about the producer. I just want to test the service code. So what I'm doing, like instead of using the .NET Core injection of my concrete classes, I'm using mock. That is going to do the same for me, but I'm providing my own data for that particular test, which makes, like, I guess, much easier to validate that the code's behaving as I want. It's just, okay. So exactly that. So I say, okay, this is the data that I want to be returned from the get out operation. So I'm providing the data that my repository class is going to be returning, but I'm mocking that, right? So I'm providing whatever data I want. Saying that I'm going to call the get all. I don't need to pass any data because the get all doesn't accept or don't expect parameters to be passed, but I'm saying exactly what I want to receive back. Oh, all right. Yep. Boy. Sorry, let me try to go back. Step into. for some reason, it's not getting into here. Anyway, I was going to show that this code is coming exactly on the same place, and I'm getting the data that I want to. Let me see if I'm doing the right thing. Just one second. Set up. Sorry, guys. Oh, this is all the setup. Sorry. Here, process data. Sorry. Now I'm gonna have what I want. So I'm gonna call here. It's gonna go exactly inside the same place, but it thinks like I did all the mocking of the dependencies that I need. In this case, it's gonna be the mocking that I need to provide is the logger, the configuration service with the configuration data, the service itself in the repository class. So this is all that I need to provide here. And if I call, let me do this one. So if I call the repository, because I provided that 3 records, I guess. So I'm kind of saying, okay, yeah, whenever you call this, don't call the database, don't call the actual data store, just use the data that I provided, which makes a lot easier for me to test that particular code. Over here. So if I look at my test explorer, yep, successful. Based on my conditions, it's working as I expected. So I think, yep, that's all what I wanted to show you guys in terms of how we do development and what we call like integration as a code in ASB. So even though we have Beanstalk and have some workflow engines, most of our integration code is C# development. As I mentioned, we are working now moving .NET Framework to .NET Core. We are probably going to be working with the next versions of .NET, starting with .NET 5, .NET 6, and so on. And using these latest frameworks is going to enable us to work with containers, Kubernetes, Docker Swarm, and on top of those things, we have Kafka as our, I guess, eventing or streaming engine, and we have some things being developed in Azure as well. But all these development follows the same principles, follow the same design patterns all the time. Okay. Questions, comments, suggestions. So again, this is the first time that I did this session. I think I still need to do some improvements on it. So if you guys have suggestions, I would like to hear that as well.
So if anyone has any questions, probably please unmute yourself. No? Okay. So looks quite interesting, Alessandro. It's probably a session later on more around the design principles and the patterns would be a really good fit.
Yeah, I need to prepare a little bit more around like explaining some of the design patterns you use. So some of them are very, I guess, more not simple but more common, like the repository or the single tool. But in the image personalization, I use one called strategy, which is quite awesome for adding new capabilities on your API without breaking whatever was in place. So yeah, I can try to create a session explaining those.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Greg, anything from your side?
No, pretty good for me, mate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think it's probably time to say thank you everyone that stay until 6:45. We're planning to finish at 6:30. but the talk was so good that I couldn't stop. And if I don't see any of you before next year, enjoy your break. I think we all actually deserve one after the year that was so crazy. And we see you again next year, hopefully on our first hybrid event. At this stage, I don't think we're planning to do anything in January, so I think we're coming back in February, right?
That's
Yep.
right.
Yeah, because I know that's like even that one in December, we decided to go ahead because even if we didn't have that many people, it would be recorded. And actually, I had more people than I expected connected. But I know that on January, it's going to be the presenter and some of us talking to crickets.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so in this case, I'll stop recording now. Thank you, everyone, and see you again in February.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year, guys.